Hey everyone, I'm Xorje Olivares and welcome to another Hey Xorje conversation. This time I'm talking to the hosts of the Four Colored Nerds podcast. Now, you'll recognize these voices for a variety of reasons. One, you've already heard me talk to these folks, Brittany Luse and Eddings, the host of this podcast, but also something that I did this time last year for Black History Month, a project that was very special to me when I was still at SiriusXM Progress, which was allowing folks, and I shouldn't even say the word allowing because they should rightfully have this space, but presenting folks in my life who I had connections with the chance to take over my show, which was at the time called Affirmative Reaction. And immediately when I knew that we were doing this project, I reached out to Brittany and Eric and asked if they were interested, and thankfully they said that they would. And so about a year ago, I was able to kind of show what the new Four Colored Nerds podcast, the new iteration of it, was going to sound like. Yeah. Because as y'all know, the show is back. It's come back after a little brief hiatus. It went from an independent production to now being a Stitcher production, which we'll get into a little bit. But it's still exactly what you love about Brittany and Eric's friendship, what you love about their commentary, talking about things that only they two could talk about, but in a way that's very universal because we all love pop culture. We all love what's happening in the news. We all love how just culture defines who we are as humans. And I'm glad to know that these two humans have a lot in common with me. So really excited to talk to Eric and Brittany here on Hey Xorje. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thank you for that.
Thanks for having us again.
Yeah. And that lovely introduction. It's so nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the thing that I want folks to recognize is when you work in the media space, it's very hard sometimes to develop connections, to have this level of relatability with folks because everyone's on that hustle. Everyone's trying to have their stake in the game. But then there's other times when you see like for like, and you start to recognize that the folks that are doing what you're doing are doing it for the exact same purposes that you are. And I immediately identified that with each of you. And so I guess I want to ask this first off. I'll start with you, Eric, and then I'll go to Brittany. When you think about just doing a show, when you talk about being a podcaster, what does that even mean to you right now? Knowing the history of, and we'll get a little bit into that, of how each of you have approached our conversation today. Yeah. Where does that leave you with the definition of what you do?
Well, it's so much a part of everything that I do, which I say that almost like in an overwhelmed, from an overwhelmed standpoint. But I think the thing that I had to realize about myself, and I think when Brittany and I first started podcasting, I don't think I had come to this conclusion, was that I am someone who has a lot to say. And it's like, at its core, I know Brittany's shocked, but I think that a lot of times there's thinking you have a lot to say, and then there's funneling enough to feel confident in what you do say. And I think that the process of podcasting and finding that kind of over and over again with Brittany, to be frank, has just been an exercise of me realizing that like there are things that are important to me that if I don't get out, I don't feel great. Initially we were just trying to find a way to hang out and kick it and like talk about the things we saw in the world. But as it went on, it definitely became deeper. And I was like, no, wait, talking about these things is important to me. Saying or looking at our culture the way we do is important. And so that increased the urgency. And so once I got to that, it started to kind of take over all these spots where it was like, okay, well, if I'm making a show, how do I think about the community in which I make that show in, which leads you to connecting with people. In my case, eventually you get down that road. It led to me taking an additional job also in podcasting. So this industry has given me the title of creator. It's given me the confidence to feel like what I have to say is important and how I want to look at the world is important. And it's almost challenged me to then make the network and the environment, to be frank, conducive to being able to actually do that. So I think that's like the I don't know. It's a quick version of where I'm at. I'm curious, Brittany. I'm curious what you have to say.
Wait, restate the question because I want to make sure that I'm answering your question specifically. Because you answered the question, but you also add some other things, and I was like, well, damn, that got me thinking about a lot of things. So I want to make sure I answer your question.
I would love to hear everything that you have in store for what Eric just said. But I'm also curious, and this is kind of my reframing of the question in a bit. At a time where there are 3 million podcasts out there, and at some point, as a lot of us have noticed with the And Just Like That Sex and the City reboot, like where there's that scoff about podcasting and like, ugh, of course you're a podcaster. Like, how do you take this title that has really defined a good portion of your career? Doing podcasts, this show, and then the other one that we can also talk about in just a bit. But how do you make that yours? How do you make that term or that profession really something that makes sense for Brittany?
There are so many different ways to define what it means to be an athlete or an educator or a doctor. There are different specializations, whether you play for a certain team or in a certain part of the world, or you practice medicine in a certain state within a certain discipline. It all says a lot more in specific about what you actually do, what you're actually doing when you say that you're an athlete or whatever. Like even saying you're an artist. Are you mixed media? Are you Jeff Koons? Do you paint? You know what I mean? There are so many. Like you can say that you're an artist and you can be Ai Weiwei or you can be Damien Hirst. And so I think that with podcasting though, like the need for people like myself to find ways to make the label fit us as an individual or fit ourselves as individuals. It kind of speaks to the fact that I think that we just need a broadening for what a podcaster can look like. Like, what's happening right now, the Beijing Olympics. Literally, an athlete can be somebody who does like figure skating, but also someone who does curling and also someone who skis, right?
Yeah.
Like
an Olympian.
A podcaster can be me. Unfortunately, it can also be someone like Joe Rogan. But I think that for me, I think that I don't know. A part of me is like, I do have definite, like there's certain things that I do think about and certain principles that I engage when I think about my work and doing it in a way that makes me feel good. So like saying things that are true, or at least as true as I know them to be at the time, platforming people who have really thoughtful things to say that we think that other people really need to hear. Yeah. And maybe like, not platforming people who have harmful things to say. I don't think everything needs to be a debate. We don't need to live crossfire every week. But and also too, just like talking about things and using the platform that we have to get the word out about things that we wish that people were talking about more, or wish that people were talking about in more careful ways. So like when I talk about myself as a podcaster, that's sort of what I mean. That could be through storytelling, and that could be through interviews, that could be through conversation. But yeah, I think also though, like as much as I enjoy like thinking about that from what that word means to me as an individual, I do also think that like we just need to broaden the idea of what a podcaster is, because part of the reason why people get that is because they're thinking about, well, someone like Joe Rogan, but not as famous and not as rich and like living in a basement. So
yeah.
That's what
just
people
struggling to put up their phone, struggling with their mic setup. Like, do I need an arm? Do I need a stand?
Like their tinfoil hats or like giving feedback to the mic. Like that's what people are thinking about when they think about podcaster. But that's, the sort of principles and the way that I think about doing my work. That's sort of what being a podcaster means to me.
I love that you mentioned this idea of the specialization, that no matter where you are in whatever field you are, that a lot of us have this area of expertise. We have this specialization that we bring to the table. And so I'm going to ask each of you this, because as co-hosts of For Colored Nerds, you all approach the show, I'm assuming in a similar way. But I'm curious if you'll answer the specialization that each of you have also similarly. So I'll start with Brittany, and then I'll go with Eric about what you feel your specialization is that you bring to the table for this show.
That's a really good question.
These are good. These are really good.
These are really good. I mean, I'm
going
to be honest with you. Nobody's ever asked me anything. Like nobody's actually ever asked us a question about what each of us bring to our work. It's never happened. So you've really cracked something here. Actually, I really want to give you credit for that. I think that
there's a lot of overlap. It happens in different ways.
There is a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
I think curiosity is one of the biggest things. Okay, so something that is really important to me. I suppose maybe this might be part of like a special thing. It might be something that Eric also brings as well to our pairing, but I think it's something that I know that I bring, and I think that I now, having like, we both have expanded our working world within podcasting to work on other shows and work with other people. I know it's something that I bring elsewhere as well, which is like knowing how to put together a good conversation, like knowing how to put together a conversation that makes that, like, I don't know, you can sit and you can be entertained and engaged and learn something for an hour, or some of our older episodes of For Colored Nerds, 90 minutes.
Yeah, a lot longer.
But at the end of it, like, you can still be left with something. I think a lot of times, like, conversations that happen in digital spaces can feel very ephemeral, or can just feel like two people talking about nothing, which, not gonna lie, I listen to a lot of podcasts like that. There's some good celebrity gossip stuff.
Sometimes personalities,
and I'm into it,
make it work,
but,
and you just go with it.
Yeah,
I like the idea that, like, I really believe in taking something that we make that's digital and giving a tangible takeaway for the listener, so that even if, like, even if we're talking about something they're familiar with, like today we just had an episode come out about Janet Jackson's documentary. Most Black people our age have a really good working knowledge of Janet Jackson, but it was really important.
Era, Velvet Rope era, just give me something.
Exactly, just give them something to think about. But yeah, I think for me, I love putting together a conversation that, whether it's a topic that's new to you or something that you know like the back of your hand, you're going to come away with something tangible. And I think that doing that in a medium that's so digital is really important, giving the listener something tangible through conversation.
Yeah.
Do you see some similarities there, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in general, like, there's we both have an intellectual curiosity that I think drives us to a degree we both don't understand, and which kind of pushes us in a bunch of different directions, especially when they work together with each other. I think something that I would say about myself, and I think Brittany also does this too, but I think I'm pretty good with, like, ideas, just like kind of starting from the moment of, like, wait, is that something? I think something, and then kind of getting it to okay, this is the conversation, and it feels different because it's very important. Because I think that's where a lot of for us, the sauce comes into play. But that said, something I also say is I think I have a lot of ideas. I think Brittany sometimes has fewer, but they're better formed by the time they come out. So, like, a lot of my stuff
that's partnership, that's collaboration right there.
That's why it takes two.
Yeah, my stuff will get killed in the room. Brittany does the work to make sure that it's, like, ready when it gets there. But beyond that, there are different parts that we both kind of sometimes have a flair for. I think, Brittany has really been leaning into, like, editing, and she's been doing a lot of editing work. And, to be frank, like, if she's like, actually, I think we should rearrange this conversation this way, a lot of times I'm like, yeah, she's right. Go ahead, do it. And I think for me, a lot of where I want to take things are just making sure we're approaching something in the most, like, out of the box way possible. And we all do that work, but that's one that I'm always like, if there's something I'm trying to be a little better at, usually that's why I'm trying, because I just enjoy that part of it so much.
So again, I keep saying that this is for the For Colored Nerds podcast. A lot of folks will understand, if they've been following your careers, that there was another show called The Nod that was made for Gimlet. There's quite a journey there. You were no longer doing that show because of other things that we don't necessarily have to get into. But I do want to talk about how the fact that this is a reinvigorated version of the show that you previously did, which is part of the reason how you all each came into podcasting. What is it about when you were thinking about reviving For Colored Nerds, doing it in this particular updated way? When you looked at the older version, you said, I don't want to do anything. Like, was there something that you looked at from the past version that you said, I don't want to do? Or was it a lot of, like, I'm so excited to get back to that because it meant so much to me and to our audience?
I think it's more of the latter.
Yeah.
One thing I will say that we didn't want to do is have the 90-minute episodes.
Like, people's attention span is just not there.
Safe. This is a safe space. We have taken down our episode length we're close to an hour now.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was something that we just wanted. I was excited. Speaking for myself, I was just excited to go back and get into it. Part of what made it so much fun to get back into For Colored Nerds after all these years is much like Sex and the City. We had a hiatus, which allowed us to grow and mature and approach different topics, or even sometimes approach the same topics in a much different way than we would have in the past. Like every project that we've worked on in media, together and separately, has taught us each something, many things, but we've been able to walk away with really great lessons from all of those things. And I was really excited to apply what we had learned about crafting a conversation, about crafting a story, about introducing an audience to an idea and then talking them through a complex conversation about that idea. Everything that we learned about how to do those things, all those skills, we're able to rely on now in making the show. Whereas before, we were learning while we were making it in a way that I think sometimes you can hear in the work. But even as we were going back and revisiting older episodes to kind of find old clips that we needed to put into like the trailer for the new version of For Colored Nerds, going back and listening to old episodes, we were like texting each other like, hey, some of these were pretty good. This is not bad.
On top of our game here.
Yeah.
To be worried about.
Got some talent here. No, I think the only thing I'd add there is like, for me, I agree with what Brittany said, because for me, it wasn't actually what we were doing. I actually have enjoyed almost all the experiences I've had, like working in podcasting. It's the circumstances that we were doing them in that was the only part that kind of sucked. And so I think like coming into this now, having the opportunity to say like, what do we want to hear? What do we want to say? What do we think our audience wants to hear? What do they, what do they want us to say? And how would they want us to do it? That is fun. And actually going back into what is that, a surprisingly deep well of like tools that we have at our disposal of how to tell those stories is also really exciting, because, we will stumble into an idea and be like, oh, right, we remember how to make this cooler. We can like take it another degree. And so, yeah, I look back on it, and, even the late nights cutting, it taught me something.
There will always be some late night cutting.
Absolutely.
I do want to ask, and I just want to say, because I've been sort of dancing around it, about when it came to the nod, there was issues of ownership, which made things quite complicated. But each of you have full ownership of the For Colored Nerds, again, the original show that you all started together, which has now been revived and is now being produced by Stitcher. But I want to talk about, because I'm sure there's a lot of debate about what it means to be a nerd and like what counts as nerdy behavior. But I kind of want to put the word nerd aside for a bit and focus on the word colored, because I feel like there's quite a bit of nuance when you use a word like that. And it kind of elicits a bit of reaction from folks depending on what lived experience they're approaching it from. Talk about the decision to use that word and to have it be featured in the way that it is, in terms of being able to speak on an experience that each of you have.
Well, okay, so I'd say that the choice in the name, there's like two folds to it. So like one is that it is like a send-up of the title of the choreo poem / play by Ntozake Shange for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow was enough. And we knew that we were going deep on like topics that usually were not typically taken very seriously, like things that like pop culture, movies, TV, things that just interested us, internet gossip, celebrity, reality television. We knew we would be going deep on topics that had to do with race or Black culture. And we would be going deep on topics that usually didn't get that deeper look in like the podcasting world from the perspective of two Black people. So that is like the very practical sense of like where we got the name from. It has a ring to it, honestly. People haven't forgotten it. I'll tell you.
No, it absolutely does.
I think the other part of it too is, speaking specifically to the word colored, it, I think, spoke and still to a certain degree speaks very clearly of where we're situated in making the show, and to a certain extent, of course, the show is for everybody. We want as many people to listen to it as possible. But also, like, we think that the things that we're talking about and the conversations that we're having have value to people who are not exactly like us. However, when we were initially making the show, the audience that we envisioned was a lot like us. Yeah. And for Black people, specifically younger Black people who are our age, millennial or exennial,
Exennial
whatever,
trademark. Trademark it.
Exennial people. We have a different relationship to the word colored, as we didn't necessarily grow up with that being like a racial category in the way that it was, like, 100 or 80 years ago. And also, like, I don't know, speaking for myself, grew up like with my family using it like in passing. My mom just, if she thinks I look cute, hey, little color girl, you look so cute. You know what I mean?
Aww.
It's not, yeah. So
that is cute.
As Black people, there are words, just like so many other marginalized groups, there are words that we use that are our words. And that when you have words that other people use to harm you or to fence you in or define you, you are allowed, if you're a part of that marginalized group, to use those words in jest, in affection, as a redefinition. And you can do those things as you please. So when we have that in the title, it kind of is saying, like, this show is coming from Black people, and we're kind of speaking to other Black people. And I think the age thing also has to do with probably, like, us, again, we're people who grew up with that a word being reclaimed to a certain extent. Yeah. I certainly respect older listeners. Hopefully they're listeners who, might grapple with the word.
Yeah,
exactly. I would encourage them to listen so they can actually see what we're talking about. I think they might like it. And I know plenty of people who are boomers and so on and so forth who love the show. But I mean, the title really comes from us being young Black people who want to use our language and our terms on our terms. I mean, that's the way that I have thought about it. Eric might say something different.
No, I mean, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's speaking, it's doing a lot of work in the sense that we're telling you who the show is for, but we're also telling you who the space is for and how we've set that up to be able to, like, interact with each other. The tagline that we used to use all the time was, like, the conversations Black people have when white people aren't in the room. And so much of that is literally just to let you know, like, when we're talking in this space, I'm not thinking about you. I am thinking about how to have the conversation I want to have about the thing I want to talk about. And in that space, I might use the word colored. I probably wouldn't, but it's possible. And it's more possible in that construct because I also, when I use that, I know Brittany will understand the context that it's happening in. And so I think in opening the show up, I think a part of the value is you get to listen in. We're not gonna like explain everything, but there's an opportunity to understand how we communicate in this context about what matters to us. And we want the name to signal that, to make, and also to prepare you. And it does that on just kind of so many different levels, which has been really nice.
I also kind of want to focus on that first word, because the word "for" already denotes that this is an offering.
Yeah.
That this is something that is beyond the two of you, that this is something that is created because of love of other, and the ability to be able to share with others. What has it been like to return to this space and return to this offering and to have folks respond to you after this brief hiatus? And even though I'm sure that they did not leave you when you were doing the Knot, but there's a specific category of inclusivity that comes with doing a show like this. So what has that response been like?
It's been amazing in a way that it's hard to describe. Amazing is not a good word. I'm not like a person who, it takes me a lot to cry. But it's touching. Like, and it's going to sound ridiculous when I explain to you why, but we put out an episode that was about an hour talking about, girl boss in the city shows. It's Brittany and I talking through shows like And Just Like That, which has popped up a couple times in this conversation. Insecure, Harlem, Run the World. Also shows like even Grownish could fit in some version of that genre. And, we're talking about that seriously. Also sometimes not seriously, but we're talking about what we want to see and what we don't see and why that matters to us. And it was a bit, I would say, like I've experienced at other times in my career being a bit difficult to just get to that purity of like, hey, we care about this thing. We know our audience cares about this thing. We want to make sure that they understand the lens in which how we see it. And so being able to do that and now seeing the response to that is touching on a level I can't describe, because for that episode in particular, I can't tell you how many messages we got. Like, you said exactly what I was thinking. I'm so glad y'all had this conversation. It's people telling us, there wasn't some big announcement going on. This isn't like a pre-planned kind of cultural moment that would fit in the calendar if you were looking through touch points for the year. This was something that like we've been talking about as we watch this stuff that mattered, and people see that. And so having people come back to that feeling and communicate that we were able to help them get there, seeing themselves and challenging and complicating the way they see themselves is like, honestly, that's why I do it. And that's the feedback that like speaks to the thing that reminds me that I have something to say and that I should say it. So yeah, it's been amazing.
I think the reason why it has been so much fun is because we know so much more about how to execute the show that we want to make. Yeah. So whereas before we were kind of like, what did I say, building the plane while you're flying it?
Yeah, the stakes felt that high.
I think there's a wing. Can we go with one wing? I think we're fine with one wing.
It was just like, I guess this is how a podcast is made. Now we have such a greater command of the tools and of the methods, to get a story or a conversation in a good shape so a listener can enjoy it, that we can actually think much more deeply, I think, than maybe we were even able to a few years ago, about what would make a compelling conversation, what's going to make this unique, what's going to make this fun to listen to. And one of the things that piece of feedback we've heard repeatedly over the years is not just that, like, as with the Girl Boss in the City episode that Eric just discussed, not just, we're not just coming up with unique ways to look at certain things that are happening in the culture or having like very specific pop cultural theses, that we want to discuss. We also are finding interesting ways and unique ways to talk about things that kind of already feel like they've been talked about. Yeah. So, going back to the idea of like, an episode about the Janet Jackson documentary that just aired on Lifetime and A&E earlier this year, like that is a topic that like all of us know Janet, many of us watch the documentary, but we're going to find a different angle to talk about. We're going to find the angle that's going to like scratch that itch that you didn't know that you had. Yeah. And I think that's what's been so much fun about the show, making the show now, is that we know so much more about how to make a podcast that we can spend a lot more time and energy thinking about how are we going to give our audience the biggest payoff that they can possibly have, regardless of whether they're new to the topic or it's something that they already know and love. And that part is really fun because we put so many moments into the episodes that it's so much fun when people like write us or email us or tag us on social media and tell us what they agreed with or didn't agree with. But just knowing the fact that they actually got in there and heard those Easter eggs and those original moments is always so satisfying.
So just so that way I can kind of come full circle, and we talked about the four, we talked about the colored part. Let's talk about the nerd part.
Absolutely.
Who is a nerd that you've encountered, a celebrity nerd or somebody who, like, if you could get them on the show to kiki with you all, who would that nerd be? And what would you nerd about?
There are so many. This is like one of those questions that
That's a really good question.
I hate because the list is infinite. Somebody who popped in my head is Aldous Hodge. Strangely,
I'd love to have him on the show.
Probably for different reasons, I imagine.
Put it into the universe, make it happen.
Yes. But no, Aldous Hodge is just a really great actor. You might have seen him in shows like Underground or Leverage, but really talented, and also he was in a movie called Conviction, which was really, really kind of well reviewed, and people lauded it. But he also is a watch nerd, strangely enough.
Yes,
and he is like can go so deep on watches and horology. strangely,
Interesting.
yes.
Okay.
Strangely, I know that because like I worked randomly when I worked in advertising. I had a watch client,
Right.
and so
Right.
I know that one. This is also actually more nerdy than even the show gets sometimes. So like just as a disclaimer, but no, the watch industry is also very homogeneous, and it's really it's white. Let's say it again. Let's be clear. It's white, and it's interesting when I think about like watches as a place within like culture. You know, folks still talk about Patek Philippe or your Rolex, your Rollie, or your iStyle. Anyway, all this stuff. I think it's just he would be a really interesting person to talk about all that with, as somebody who can go deep on the technical and the cultural. So yeah. Anyway, Aldous Hodge. I'll park that. Maybe not necessarily the number one, but damn, I'm excited about what the conversation would be.
I like that take.
A person. Okay, there's a person I would love to talk to. One day I will. I promise I will. Anna Devere Smith. She is an actress, a playwright, a performer in so many senses. A lot of what she does, which I find incredible, it's based off of like Studs Terkel's work with like the I think like the WPA, like the American Writers Project, like whatever, you know, back in the New Deal or whatever. Like Studs Terkel and also Zora Neale Hurston and so many other incredible writers traveled the country collecting people's stories. And what she essentially will do is go to a site of conflict or go to a site of significance or an environment that has some major conflict going on. And she will interview people, get their stories, and then like become them. She will like study their speech, write monologues of them, and then like turn it into a theater piece. She did that with two very specific incidents around race in the early 90s, one in Crown Heights and one in Los Angeles. But she also has done it like in other spaces. Like she's done it at like a medical school. Like she went to a medical school and talked to people, I think patients, patient advocates, doctors, professors, students, and like just talked, like figured out sort of like what the shape of the conflict was through talking to people, and then reflects their stories back to them. And I always have found that so incredible. I think she's an absolute genius. She's written books, she's written plays, she's directed theater, she's acted in theater, she's been in a bunch. If you saw her face, you'd recognize her. She's been in a bunch of movies and TV shows if you don't recognize her name. But I just think that she is so brilliant, and I like, in a way, not to insult her work in any way by associating her with the word nerd.
So she's
but
a
there
nerd,
is something,
but...
some part of nerddom is being very studied about something. Yeah. And what is like more studied than like locating a place of real life conflict and interviewing people tirelessly about it, and then like learning how to be them, and then turning that into a piece of art that can memorialize a specific time, not just in the story of one person, but in the story of a community. I think it's so brilliant. I would love to have her on the show. There's a pitch.
It's ready
for her on the show.
Much like The Secret put
is
it
with
out,
me all the time.
It shall happen if we believe it so.
I hope so.
And then it'll be. Well, I just want to remind everybody, again, you can listen to Four Colored Nerds wherever you stream your podcast, but be sure to not only listen to this new iteration, but go back to the original. Yeah. See how Eric and Brittany were able to develop the following that they have, and are able to sustain it, and not only just that, but grow it with what they have going on now. So Eric and Brittany, thank you all so much for joining me to talk about this show and everything that you have going on, and well wishes to Eric on his move, which I'm sure will be imminently discussed later.
Yes, I'm always discussing it, sadly. No, seriously, thank you so much. This has been such a fun
Thank you
conversation.
So much, Xorje. It's so good to see you again.